Deputy Speaker.
Member for Moroni.
I'm pleased to rise to introduce the Waste Reduction and Recycling and Other Legislation Amendment Bill 2023, which was introduced into Queensland Parliament on 22nd of February 23. The bill amends provisions of the Environmental Protection Act 1994 Queensland and the Waste Reduction and Recycling Act 2011 Queensland to better embed the goals for and practical implementation of the circular economy principles. And the Queensland Government has set out a number of worthy targets aimed at halving the state's food waste and stopping 80% of material from ending up in landfill, and to recycle 65% of our rubbish by 2030. And the amendments proposed in this bill amend the definition of waste to allow for a thing to be declared not waste through regulation. We'll also move the definition of waste from the Environmental Protection Act 1994 to the Waste Reduction and Recycling Act 2011. The purpose for the amendment is to provide security and flexibility for those investing in the circular economy processes and products. And I support this amendment as it will ensure that valuable materials can more easily be remanufactured or recycled for other purposes. It also sends a strong signal to the waste industry that it can invest in Queensland with confidence. The removal of the Clean Earth Levy exemption brings Queensland into line with other states where the waste levy applies to any clean earth disposed of in a landfill or waste facility. Hopefully its removal will incentivise its reuse in the building sector. The bill also gives the regulator broader powers for making decisions about amending or suspending a resource recovery area (RRA) declaration. The current legislation only permits the Chief Executive to revoke an RRA in response to an identified compliance issue. Once revoked under the current legislation, the area must be quarantined for 12 months before it can be redeclared. Under the bill's changes, the regulator can now suspend the RRA area to investigate compliance issues on site. However, when no further action is required, the resource recovery area can then continue to operate without the current 12-month wait time. This provides much greater flexibility around the compliance activities in these areas. All these changes, whilst technical, incrementally narrow the scope for exemptions under the Act. They are consistent with the Waste Reduction and Recycling Regulation 2011, which phases out exemptions on road plantings from 30th of June 2023, aluminium sludge from 30th of June 2024 and fly ash from the 30th of June 2029. Deputy Speaker, the bill introduces into the Waste Act a specific definition of the circular economy and the circular economy principle, with the goal of embedding the concept into Queensland's legislative framework. The circular economy is also explicitly included in the state's waste management strategy as well as the local government strategic planning on waste. On paper, Queensland has committed to ambiguous strategies and targets for waste avoidance and recovery, which, if realised, would result in many of the targets in the Commonwealth National Action Plan being met. In 2019, Queensland implemented its waste management and resource recovery strategy, providing a strategic framework for achieving the objectives of the national waste policy. It set the following targets for 2050: 25% reduction in household waste, 90% recovery rate across all waste types and 75% recycling rates across all waste types. And this framework is underpinned by the Waste Disposal Levy, which commenced on the 1st of July in 2019 and covers approximately 90% of Queensland's population. As the Minister stated in her introductory speech, by embedding these principles across all aspects of the products that we design, manufacture and use, we will enable improved resource recovery and reduce the long-term environmental impacts of these products. However, despite these efforts, Queensland is a long way from being on track to meet its state or national waste targets. According to a report by Waste and Recycling Industry of Queensland, Untangling Queensland's Waste Levy Conundrum, Queensland still lags behind almost every other jurisdiction in Australia on 7 fronts, particularly its progress towards meeting the national waste targets. Critically, Queensland targeted recycle rates is only expected to reach 65% by 2030, a level well short of the 80% recycling target for 2030 set out in the National Action Plan. To successfully transition to a circular economy, the government needs to do much more in terms of addressing the uncertainty and confusion countered by market operators who are responsible for turning waste into a resource. This means rethinking the productivity of waste and addressing many of the regulatory gaps that are still acting as a constraint on the resource recovery activities in Queensland. By far the biggest hurdle Queensland faces in reaching its goals on waste is the state's major recycling infrastructure gap. According to the Minister, the government is co-investing with councils and industry to deliver even more recycling infrastructure across the state. However, again, the reality is Queensland still has a long way to go if it's to achieve this. There is insufficient infrastructure capacity across every category of waste in Queensland, including plastic, e-waste, organic papers and cardboard, to even be close to achieving the National Action Plan recovery rate of 80% in Queensland. Actions to expand infrastructure capacity are now absolutely critical to ensuring that Queensland has the necessary infrastructure to realise its circular economy targets. There is also an urgent need for further actions to be taken upstream to support the whole-of-lifestyle transformation envisaged by the National Action Plan. To realise this potential, the government needs to play a stronger role in ensuring there are commercially viable onshore markets capable of facilitating a circular economy. It requires targeted policies to address regulatory gaps, incentive for the use of recycled materials, and additional infrastructure to support resource and recycle activities. Without effective coordination between government and industry, many of the strategies and policies will be a complete waste of time. The government should be discussing with waste companies exactly what they need to boost their businesses, ensure profitability and drive investment. Secondly, we need to rethink how recycled products should be designed and produced. The products we use, the way we use them, need to be fit for a future where reduction, reuse and repair come first, and consideration should be given to legislating requirements on mandatory recycled content. New products should be made fully recyclable, chemically safe and ideally made from recycled materials themselves. Next to that, we need to be looking into the issue of producer responsibility and harmonised systems of waste collection. Long-standing difficulties in closing the loop also remain, with some buyers reluctant to purchase recycled or remanufactured materials. This is compounded by low manufacturing base in Australia, with limited local demand for recycled materials as manufacturing input. These findings of the National Waste Report, released on the 16th of December 2022, should be used to inform the state's future waste planning and its strategies to improve landfill management and promote circular economy opportunities. Currently, there are multiple large-scale thermal energy from waste facilities under construction in Australia, including here in Queensland. While the role of incineration in waste management appears to be popular at the moment, it's hardly sustainable practice in the circular economy. At the very least, these facilities should not be using plastic feedstocks or allowing to divert investment away from the state's much-needed recycling initiatives and infrastructure projects. According to a report presented at the UN's Environmental Assembly in Nairobi, Kenya, Australia is still dumping plastic waste in the Association of the Southeast Asian Markets countries, despite ending exports of raw plastic waste in 2020. Australia's states, including Queensland, continue to ship plastic waste fuel which contains toxic chemicals and additives, including organic pollutants and heavy metals. There are grave implications for human health in this, due to toxicity, risks and hazards of waste containing toxic additives which are amplified when burnt. The report by the International Pollutants Emission Network shows how Australia's plastic fuel waste is being dumped on the shores of at least 8 member states. This practice is a form of waste colonialism and an embarrassing example of the complete hypocrisy of the country's leaders. As the report states, Australia's policy approach, while superficially appearing to take responsibility for recycling its waste instead of exporting it, is a cynical exercise in reprocessing and repackaging the same low-grade waste for export under the guise of fuel to be burned. The Australian waste export ban announcement in 2020 amounts to little more than a public relations exercise to maintain waste movement out of Australia and into less wealthy countries, the report added. And to quote the Minister's introductory speech one last time, this is about getting things done, not just talking about them. I'd like to thank all the Secretariat. I'd like to thank all the committee. I put my views forward. Thank you, Speaker.
Speaker.
Full member for Palmerston.
Thank you, Speaker.